Hey everyone, Mark Price here at DevSlopes.com, and today we are going to learn how to work with loops. And you've already learned a little bit about arrays, and you're going to see how loops and arrays go hand in hand together. Go ahead and create a new playground. File, new playground. And let's call this Loopity Loops, because that sounds so much fun. And I'm going to save it right here. Perfect. Okay. So in order to appreciate and understand a loop, let's talk about some of the problems that we run into when we don't use loops. Okay. And we've kind of used this before, this scenario, in working with arrays. So let's do the same thing now. So we've got employees, or rather we've got employees who have salaries. Var employee 1 salary, right? So let's say we've got 4 employees each with their own salary. $45,000 for employee 1. Var employee 2 salary equals $100,000. Var employee 3 salary equals $54,000. And var employee 4 salary equals $20,000. Okay, so we've got 4 different employees here. All right. Now, let's say that we had a really good year at the company, okay, and we want to give every employee a raise. Well, let's say we need an app to do that. You know, we're a big company. We need to make sure that we can automate some things here. So we're writing an app that allows us to give instant salary increases to employees. So how do we do that? Let's say also that we need to give them a certain percentage of a salary raise. So let's include that as well too. So we're going to say employee 1 salary equals employee 1 salary plus employee 1 salary dot 0.10. Okay, so we're doing some basic high school math here. We're taking the salary of the first employee, multiplying it by a decimal, 0.10, which is 10%. So we're going to find out what 10% of their existing salary is, and then we're going to add it back onto the salary here and store it into employee 1 salary. That's all that's happening. We're giving this person a 10% increase in their salary, and they're very happy about that. Don't want any bugs in this app, that's for sure, especially if it's for your own salary. All right, so employee 2 salary is employee 2 salary plus employee 2 salary times 0.10. And you're probably thinking to yourself, all right, I get the point, Mark. You don't have to keep writing all this code. This is a drag. Well, I'm going to write it down anyway because you need to really appreciate the pain of doing this kind of stuff. Because if you're doing this kind of stuff in your code, you're doing it wrong. There's definitely a better way to code. This is called code smell, when you're like, something doesn't seem right about this. Well, we're also breaking the dry principle here too. Don't repeat yourself. All right. So we've just given every employee here a 10% raise, right? That's great. Now, the problem comes in, especially when we have like 50 employees or 100 employees. Are you going to write an app that stores all this? Also, what if we hire new employees or fire employees? How do we know how many employees there are? Every time we get a new employee, we're going to have to change our code to add the employees on here. This is not a great way to do things. Not at all. Not at all. And also, it's not a good idea to keep these all separately like this as well too. So this is bad. Okay, this is the bad way. Bad way. All right, so let's clean some things up. Let's put these employee salaries in an array. So our salaries equals, and then we can just do some copying and pasting here. So paste, this is an array. We've talked about these before. Command C, Command V, Command C. And I'm just copying and pasting here. Okay, so there's our array of salaries. So at least this is better. This is mo beta, putting it in an array. Okay, but how would we go through these and add 10% to each person's salary? Well, it would look something like this. It would be salaries 0, okay, equals, and we're going to say salaries 0, we're grabbing the first salary out of here, plus salaries 0 times 0.10. Okay, And then same thing here. Salaries 1 equals salaries 1 plus salaries 1 times 0.10, etc., right? For the other two. Okay, so is this any better than this? Not really. We're still writing lots of code. So this is definitely better, putting it in an array versus 4 different variables, but this is no good. This is a lot of manual work. And again, we don't know, I'm putting numbers in here, but we don't know how many employees are actually in the list. It's going to come into the app, and we wouldn't know unless we counted them all and then changed our code, which is, you don't do that. Nobody rewrites code and does all that stuff manually based on some condition in the real world. So how do we solve this problem? Well, we can solve this problem that's making our life so miserable right now by using a loop. And let's create our very first loop. We're going to do a while loop, okay? So we're going to say var x equals 0. This is going to be an index. And then we're going to say repeat while x is less than salaries.count. Okay? Then we're going to say x plus equals 1. Okay. So, what is going on here? Okay, well, look over here on the right. It says it ran this loop 4 times. So here's the syntax. The keyword is repeat, okay? Repeat. And then a opening bracket and closing bracket. Inside, we're incrementing x by 1. It's a variable of type int. And then while x is less than salaries.count. So every loop in programming will repeat itself until some condition is met. Okay, that's what you need to remember. Don't think of the syntax because there's different types of loops. Loops will repeat until some condition is met. And in this case, here in the parentheses, while x is less than salaries.count. Let's see how many items are in salaries. 1, 2, 3, 4. So while x is less than 4, well, it starts at 0. So this is what's going to happen. This loop's going to be run once for sure, no matter what. And x is now equal to 1, so x plus equals 1. Okay, and then it says while x is less than salaries.count. So while 1 is less than salaries.count, okay, it is still less than salaries.count. So it's going to go through again from top to bottom, over and over and over again until x is now equal to 4. So this will, at some point, this will increase x to 4. And then this will no longer be true because 4 is not less than salaries.count. 4 is not less than 4, is it? No, 4 is equal to 4. Okay, so there's a difference here. If I was to say less than or equal to, it would run 5 times. But we don't want it to run 5 times. Okay, because that would crash our application if we're accessing elements out of this array. So, how do we use this loop to solve our problem? Well, let me tell you there, Bob. We first crash Xcode. That's the right thing to do. Let's open up Xcode again. Are you ready? So here it goes. Salaries x equals salaries x plus salaries x times 0.10. Okay. Well, this is interesting. What's going on here, Mark? Why are you putting an x inside of an array? That doesn't make any sense. I thought arrays couldn't take strings. Well, it's not a string, right? It's an int. And this is also an int. You access elements out of your array using an int. Okay, you put in the subscript here. We want the first element or the second element. So the same thing's happening here. We have a variable that represents our index. So what we could also have done is call this index, if that makes any more sense to you. And then what you can do, you can just pass the index here instead. Oops, not that though. And then right here. And right here. So, a little more wordy, but it makes more sense now. So we have an index, and we're passing an index, and that's giving us the element. So it's going to repeat and grab items out of that. So let's look at this again. Salaries index. Well, if it's the first time through, index is equal to 0, so we're going to grab 45,000. So we're saying this slot here is equal to salaries index, so it's equal to 45,000 plus 45,000 times 0.10. Okay, and so we're going to take that amount here, that 10%, we're going to add it onto 45,000, and then we're going to store the result of this operation here. Okay, and we're going to pass it or assign it here into our salaries index, into the same spot that we want it to. And so this is cool. So yeah, we got 1, 2, 3, 4. We got 5 lines of code here versus potentially, well, let's look at this here. If we wanted to do the same thing over here, we would have 1, 2, 3, 4 lines of code and 5. You're like, haha, Mark, it's not any less code. It's the same amount of code that we wrote before. Well, what happens if your company has a lot of employees? So what if it has this many employees? There's 28 employees. Now, if I wanted to do this down here, I'd have like 28 lines of code. That's no good. Plus this. Whereas this will always stay at 5, even if I had 1 million employees. So we're starting to make really good progress here. Again, so a loop, all a loop's going to do is go over and over and over and over again until some condition is met. In this case, well, index is less than salaries dot count. Okay? If I didn't have this line of code here, do you know what we would have? See how it's running here? We would have an infinite loop. This will eventually crash the program. Luckily, the playground's smart enough to stop it for us. But if you did something like that in your app, you would get an infinite loop. Your app would run out of memory and it would crash, and your user would give you a 1-star review. This developer does not know how to make apps. So you always have to have a way to get out of a loop, and it's by meeting the condition. And so that's why we're increasing the index by 1 each time. So eventually we can meet the condition. So that's how loops and arrays go hand in hand. You have a set of data, and you can iterate through the data with a loop. Does that make sense? Is anyone confused? Because if you are, what I want you to do is pause the video. You can watch this portion again, or you can go online and do some research on how do loops work in programming, and they can give you some more under the hood computer science aspects and theory about it. Okay, so this is a repeat while loop. Now, you're not going to use these a whole lot. I wanted to show you the repeat while loop because it's very wordy and it makes sense when you look at it. The loop that you're probably going to use more so is a for in loop. Let's do that next. Let's bring it down here. Okay, so we're going to write the exact same code with even less lines of code, which is cool. So for x, or let's say I, to represent index, in 0 ... less than salaries dot count. And then what we'll do is we'll just copy this 1 line of code here and paste it here. So now we're doing the exact same thing. Oops, this should be I, not index. We're doing the exact same thing here in 3 lines of code that we did with 5 lines of code. So it's smaller. So let's talk about what's happening. So for, meaning given, or for each, okay? It's just this is called a for in loop, okay? As you can see, the for and the in. So for I in 0 ... less than salaries account. So what we're doing here is we are specifying a range, okay? We're saying start at 0 and go all the way to salaries.count, which is currently 28, but we need to be -1 because arrays start at 0, which is why we use the less than sign. So ... less than. You notice how we don't put a space before this or a space after, okay? So between 0 and salaries.count, so between 0 and 27. And then we go through and we run this, and it's going to do the exact same thing as this, okay? And if you're confused at all, let me write this up in even simpler terms. So for, let's say, x in 1 ... 5, let's just print index, and we're going to say is equal to the x. Okay, 5 times right here. As you can see, it printed out 5 times for x in 1 through 5. So what just happened here? It's inclusive, okay? So it included the 1 and it included the 5 and everything in between. So this is a range. You can call it a sequence, you can call it a range. So it's a sequence of numbers or a range, and that's the condition. So for every, you're going to run this loop for every item in this range between 1 and 5, or including 1 and 5, inclusive. Same thing here, okay? Between 0 and salaries.count, or less than salaries.count. So that means 27, okay? So this one is inclusive, this one's exclusive of the number that you put here. Okay, so in this case here, let's just do the same thing over here again. For z in 1 ... less than 5, We're going to print index z, and then we'll go ahead and put z in here. Okay, so in this case, it only ran 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so this was exclusive. It did not include the 5 because we have the less than sign there. Okay, and what's happening is every time it goes through this loop, it passes that value of this range here, the current iteration of that range, it passes it here into this constant. This number cannot be changed. It passes it in here so you can use it for whatever you want. In our case here, we're using it each time to access the element in the array. So in this case, it's going to run this code 28 times between 0 and 27. And it's going to pass that number into I every single time, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then you can use those numbers on your array elements, which is pretty cool, which is why we do salaries.count. We get the total length of the array as our maximum number, and then we run through it. So we know it's going to stop once it gets us where we need to be. So we don't have to do this kind of junk anymore. We don't have to do this kind of junk anymore. You're going to have an array of salaries, and then you can run loops to get information out of those salaries or out of that array, which is pretty cool. Now, loops can take a long time to understand. If this is really confusing for you, it's okay. It's normal to be confused. All you need to know as a beginner is how to use these tools, because as you get better at them, you're gonna understand what's going on under the hood and how these things work. Okay, so what we've done here is we've created a while loop, and we've created 3 for in loops. There's one more loop I want to talk about, and it's a for each loop. Okay, and it's technically a for in loop, but I'll show you why it might make sense to word it as for each. So for salary in salaries, okay, print salary. So let's say you want to create something that goes through all the salaries and prints them up. Okay, so what we're doing here is very similar to this for in loop, but there's no range. Okay, so what we're doing here is we're saying for each, visualize this in your mind, for each item in this array, run a loop. So that's the condition. For every item that's in this array, run this loop. So in our case here, for every salary that is inside the salaries array, okay, print salary. So what it does is it skips some things for you. It takes off this heavy lifting for you. Grabbing the index, it says, oh, don't worry about that. We'll do that for you. So it grabs the item out of the array for you automatically and sticks it here in a constant. How cool is that? Sticks it for you right there, ready for you to use without having to grab it out of the array itself. And then we're just in this case we're just printing it, right? Pretty cool stuff, I think. And so it's doing the exact same thing as you can see right here. It's printing up all of these salaries here. And so this is a for in loop as well, but you may also want to call it a for each loop. Okay, for each salary in salaries, grabs each item out of the array one at a time, puts it in this variable so you can use it, and when it gets to the end, your loop is done. So you don't ever have to worry about an infinite loop for the most part in this case, whereas right here we had to create some condition to get rid of it, to get out of the loop. Okay, so really cool stuff. Loops. This is what you're going to do most of the time. There's a lot more that goes into it, and they get trickier as you go down the line, but for most of what we'll be doing and for most of what you'll be doing, this kind of covers the basics of what you'll spend most of your time working on when it comes to loops and arrays. Pretty cool. So that's it. Mark Price at devslopes.com. See you next time.